Good afternoon. I want to go ahead and get started because we also have folks who are on the web who are waiting for us to begin. And so I certainly wanted to welcome you all here and to tell you how excited I am about this conversation, because I think it's important for us to think not only about what's happening on Oberlin's campus, but what's happening nationally around the issues of perceptions of higher education. And we couldn't have a better person here to help us think through this. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the American Council on Education, because I think they've been an important essentially think tank and rallying organization to help all of us in higher education respond to the changing landscape. ACNE has 1,800 members, of which Oberlin is a member, and they help shape public policy on higher education. They foster innovation, and they mobilize the higher education community around these issues. And this is really all a part of the work that we've been doing around the ongoing discussion of the changing landscape of higher education. And this work is challenging work, but important work as all of us try to rethink what it means to be a small private liberal arts college in this changing environment. So you know that we've been having these discussions at Oberlin in the context of our own opportunities and our own challenges. And it's certainly true that Oberlin is a part of the national dialogue. The questions that abound are questions about the liberal arts, its fundamental value. People have asked questions about our cost, not just at Oberlin, but at small private colleges across the country. Certainly people are asking us to think about our economic model and how it impacts them. And of course, many conversations about how we talk about our work. And are there ways for us to influence not just prospective students and families, but also decision makers? And so for Oberlin, we've been having these discussions both at the micro level and at the macro level. So you'll remember in July, we did a webinar that was really about our own financial framework here at Oberlin, but it was in the context of these challenges that are impacting higher education nationally, and also all the levers we have to think about our own model, what it looks like right now, and what it will look like in the next 10 years. And this is really a conversation today that's a macro conversation around the national debate and the national discussion. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to have webinars. We will do one either at the end of October or in early November, focus on our endowment. We will likely do one around admissions and advancement. I hope we can do a macro discussion around innovation in the liberal arts. So that's the context for this conversation today. And so who we have with us is Terry Hartle. He's a senior vice president at the American Council on Education. And he's considered one of the most experienced advocates for higher education. He's served at ACNE for 20 years. He directs comprehensive efforts to engage federal policymakers on a broad range of issues, including student aid, government regulation, scientific research, and tax policy. His work has required him to go and be before Congress, a challenge, I'm sure, and administrative agencies and the federal courts. And he's really considered an expert voice on these issues. Prior to joining the council, he served for 6 years as education staff director for the Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources, and that was chaired by Senator Kennedy. Prior to that, he was the director of social policy studies and a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And he also received his doctorate in public policy from George Washington University, a master's in public administration from the Maxwell School at Syracuse, and a bachelor's degree in history from Hiram College, which is close to us. And we had a chance to have dinner last night, and Terry mentioned that he has spent many a brunch at the then Oberlin Inn with his grandparents, and so he is very familiar with Oberlin and very familiar with the city of Oberlin, and certainly deeply familiar with higher education. So with that, Terry Hartle. So you may have to move back your slides a bit.
I'll back it up. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for those kind words. I am delighted to be here. One, because I grew up about 20 miles from here, and so it's almost like coming home for me. Second, because I've always thought private liberal arts colleges like Oberlin were idyllic places, and it's great to be on them. One of the drawbacks of my job is I don't get to spend as much time on college and university campuses as I would like. So this has been a wonderful opportunity for me just to walk around and remember why it is I do what I do. And third, I'm happy to be here because it is really great to be out of Washington, D.C. You have no idea how good it is to be outside Washington, D.C. Okay, in the wake of the 2016 election, a lot of industries asked themselves, what just happened? What have we missed? How did this take place? What should we be thinking about that perhaps we haven't been thinking about? And we were no exception. The questions we asked ourselves quite simply were, what did the public know and think about higher education? Why did they value higher education? How much did they value higher education? What did they value it for? Were their perceptions of values increasing or decreasing? To answer this question, over the last 15 to 18 months, I participated in 18 focus groups around the country, and we conducted 2 national surveys of registered voters. Basically, we were looking for voters with kids, but not exclusively. In many cases, the registered voters had been to college and were graduates. Others had some college, others had no college. But we wanted to know what they thought about higher education and what that told us about the state of our industry in general. It doesn't necessarily apply in all its particulars to individual institutions. We were trying to understand what it means about all of higher education. Let me start with 2 observations. First, experts in any field are always surprised and usually dismayed to discover that the public does not know much about the area of their expertise. It doesn't matter if we're talking about healthcare, about national defense, about politics, or education. The public simply doesn't have the level of knowledge that many of us think they ought to have or that they should have. We're usually surprised by how rough their understanding is of something that we have devoted our lives to. The first time I observed a focus group, the focus group moderator put some diploma sleeves on the table, you know, the things that the diplomas come in at graduation. And the moderator just wanted to get an open-going discussion started. And so the moderator said, are any of these better than the others? And one of the participants in the focus group immediately shot up her hand, pointed to one diploma sleeve and said, that's the best. The moderator said, well, Carol, you've picked MIT. Why did you pick MIT? And Carol said, because they teach you things that will be useful in the job market like auto repair. I passed out. I don't know what happened after that, but that was an introduction to what you might hear when you sit down with a dozen to 14 members of the public for an open-ended discussion about higher education. So keep that in mind as I run through this, because not everything they think is accurate or right. It's just what they think. Second observation, American higher education is a house with many rooms. We have 2-year institutions, we have 4-year colleges, and we have universities. We have public and we have private nonprofit. Nowadays, we even have private for-profit. All of them are different. All of them have different histories, missions, and cultures. All of them operate on their own base. So it's very hard to generalize about institutions because even within the category of liberal arts colleges and universities, Oberlin is not St. John's in Annapolis. Oberlin is not Hillsdale, but they are both highly respected liberal arts colleges. So even within those broad categories, there's lots of variation that influences how schools will respond to what the public thinks. And just a third observation, this is what the public thinks as of the middle of 2018. Public's views will change. Might be 5 years, might be 10 years. This is where they are now. And to the extent that institutions like Oberlin and many other places are thinking about their future directions, their strategic plans, where they want to be a decade down the road, this is something to keep in mind. I can tell you where the public is right now, can't tell you where they're going to be in 5 years. Before I get into the slides themselves, let me give you the bottom line here. First, the public thinks higher education is important. They very much want it for their kids. They particularly want a 4-year education for their kids. They think all forms of post-secondary education are valid, 2-year institutions, trade schools, but for their own kids, they want a 4-year education. And they generally trust colleges and universities as institutions. We don't live in an era in which there is a significant level of trust in institutions. The fact is they tend to trust us. But having said that, here's the bad news. They think a college degree has lost economic value. They think it's far too expensive. They think students borrow too much money to pay for it. They dislike student loans, and they don't think it prepares students for the workforce. So we got plenty of news in here that's good. We got a lot of other news in here that ought to lead to discussions on individual campuses about how we address it. Okay. First slide. One of the most important things here is that the public's confidence in colleges and universities remains relatively high and pretty stable. Now, when you look at this, what you'll notice is a big drop between 2010 and 2017 and 2018. But the importance here is this is still a pretty high number, and this is flat. All institutions have dropped in public trust and public confidence. And when I say 67% is pretty good, let me put that in context for you in terms of confidence in institutions. The public opinion polls reveal that the public has, 74% of the public has confidence in the military. 52% of the public has confidence in the local police. Everybody else is below 50%. So we have the Supreme Court at 37. We'll see how long that lasts. Banks are at 30. Public schools 29, big business 25, newspapers 23, and bringing up the rear is Congress with 11. 67% is a terrific number. We used a political pollster to run our polling numbers. He looks at this number and says that he has political clients who would kill for confidence levels half that high. Well, if you knew some of his clients, you might understand that better. But that's good news. More good news. The public has pretty favorable impression of higher education institutions themselves. We asked the public if they had a favorable or unfavorable impression of the phrase colleges and universities. You see the numbers between our first poll last March, March 2017, and numbers in July 2018. Essentially no change in these numbers. We didn't ask about community colleges in particular in March of 2017. Look at this. The least popular numbers on the list, Ivy League. Elitist, expensive, liberal, not like us. The public just doesn't have a favorable impression of Ivy League institutions as they do other ways of talking about higher education. Small private colleges, almost 7 in 10 adults have a favorable impression of small private colleges. So more good news. Now for the less good news. We asked the public whether they think the economic value of higher education has increased or decreased over the past 20 years. And the numbers here, March 2017, 35% thought it had decreased. As of July 2018, this had jumped to 48%. So almost half the public thinks that the economic return of a college degree has gone down. This is wrong. This is factually wrong. Indeed, if you looked over the last 20 years at a bachelor's degree, at a 2-year degree, at a high school diploma, at some college, all of those show a decline in average earning. The only thing that shows an increase is a bachelor's degree. The public doesn't buy it. What's worrisome to us is how much this number shifted in a short period of time. Part of the an aspect of this. Remained the same has declined, and they all went down this way. Don't know decreased considerably, and they all went up this way. Number who think it's increased, the right answer is roughly 1 voter in every 4. So this is what we're dealing with when you're trying to sell a post-secondary education. They think that the economic return is going down. Why do they think this? Well, because a lot of the narrative in the media is the cost of college is up, students are borrowing lots of money, wages are flat, students leave colleges and they can't get jobs and end up living in the parents' basement. Therefore, the value of a college degree must be falling. This is not good news, as I said, and it's a big change in a short period. Public also thinks the quality of a college degree is declining. We asked this question, and 42% said the value of a college degree had decreased versus 28% who said it remained the same. Just 20% thought it actually had increased. I'm relatively sure that we all want the public to know that in many, many ways the quality of a college education has increased. But that's something that the public doesn't intuitively believe. It's not clear why they think this. Perhaps because they think the value is going down. It must be related to the quality of the education. Just don't know. Another set of somewhat troubling numbers. We asked the public if they think that higher education is moving in the right direction or wrong direction. We didn't define what we meant by right direction, wrong direction. We just asked them what they thought. In 2017, the public was pretty much split. Wrong track 38%, right track 35%. But look what's happened by July 2018. 50% say higher education's on the wrong track, just 27% say it's on the right track. Again, that's a pretty significant change in a very short period of time. What's particularly noticeable about this, 38-35 to 50-27, is it occurred at the same time that the public's opinion of the right track, wrong track numbers of the country are getting more favorable. So again, the public in September of 2017 thought higher education was 38-35, it went to 50-27. The country itself went from 60% 32 wrong track to 53-41 wrong track. Public thinks the country's getting better, not sure about higher education. We asked the public what they thought about various types of college degrees. We asked them what they thought about STEM degrees, business degrees, and liberal arts degrees to see what they had a favorable impression of. If you are running a liberal arts college, these numbers are real worrisome. 47% have a favorable impression, 37% have an unfavorable impression. Look at how the unfavorables here compare with STEM degrees and business degrees. Obviously, these are general terms, and liberal arts, for example, mathematics can be a liberal art and it's also part of STEM. I get all that. But this is the level at which the public thinks about this stuff, and that is quite simply where they are at this point in time. Primary reason to go to college. This has stayed remarkably stable. The public values higher education for instrumental reasons. The value of a college degree is to get a job. This has probably always been the case. One suspects it has increased since the Great Recession because a lot of people lost jobs in the Great Recessions. Your likelihood of losing a job was correlated with your level of education. More education you had, less likely you were to lose a job. So going to college to get a job is something the public has always valued in America, and now nothing else really comes close to that reasoning. Well-rounded education, that's obviously what would be at the heart of the Oberlin experience. That comes in a clear second. When you combine these numbers with the declining impression of the value of the liberal arts, that creates a challenge even for the best liberal arts institutions in the country. It means that the public has to be persuaded more than perhaps you realize about the value of a liberal arts education. As you heard, I went to a liberal arts college. I think these are the most wonderful institutions in the world, but I'm not your typical member of the public. Because they said that the reason to go to college was to get a job, the next logical question is, well, if you go to college, are you ready to enter the workforce? Look how this number has changed. March 2017, 49% of the respondents thought if you were a college graduate, you were ready to enter college. That fell to 34%. Meanwhile, the people who didn't think they were ready went from 34 to 53. In other words, more than half of the public registered voters told us that they do not think college graduates are ready to enter the workforce. Even if you're a liberal arts institution that is not primarily focused on placing people in jobs, this number has to be a matter of concern to you. Also asked the public to rank 7 different ways to measure success in higher education. And basically what we did was we listed the 7 things out, and we asked them to assign a weighting to each of the 7, 1 through 7. A job in a field related to what they studied. Average 3.02. This is clearly the winner. But look at the next 4. A stable job, an enriching or satisfying job, a high-paying job. The first 4 things the public came up with related to employment. A richer intellectual life, that's quite a ways down. An enhanced quality of life, that's quite a ways down. These are the things that liberal arts college historically want to talk about. The public is saying that's not necessarily a measure of success to us in higher education. And look at this. One of the things that every college president talks about and really believes in is that higher education increases civic involvement. And the evidence on this is incontrovertible. If you go to college and you graduate, you're more likely to vote. You're more likely to be involved in community activities. You're more likely to volunteer. The public is basically saying we could care less about civic engagement. It just doesn't sell with the public. Part of the reason I think we have challenges with the public right now is on this single slide, and I'd like to take a couple of minutes to walk you through it. This slide shows over the last decade, well, almost decade, going back to 2008, 2009, shows what's happened to family income and to college prices. Family income, this is median household income, is this line up here. This is the published price at a 4-year college or university. This is the net price after student aid price at a 4-year private college or university. Public colleges are here for published. This is the net price for public colleges and universities. But let me put the percentage change on here to give you an idea for why the public is concerned. Median household income over this time period has gone up 2.8% total. In other words, less than 3%. And if you look at that, all the gain occurred in the last year. Meanwhile, over this same time period, published prices at private 4-year colleges and universities, the price you put in the catalog, the price you put on your webpage, went up 32%. The net price went up 28%. So the public is looking at higher education and saying it's running away from us. Our ability to finance it is diminishing, and they're not wrong. Indeed, at some point before too long, the published 4-year private price is going to hit median income. That's going to be quite a surprise, isn't it? Meanwhile, down at this end, 32% here, as I mentioned, sorry, this is 28%, as I mentioned here. Public 4 years went up 35%. Public 4-year net price up 19%. Any way you look at it, before we start talking about student aid or after we talk about student aid, price of higher education is going up much faster than family income. Not a good scenario if we want the public to think it's intuitively affordable. By the way, Oberlin, Here's your price, and you'll notice you're pretty much going up just about the same slope on this line as the rest of the private four-year colleges, maybe a little bit faster over the last decade. Your net price is still substantially higher than the net price at most private four-year colleges. They're down here about $22,000. You're up here in the range of $42,000 net price. This is not where you want to be. It's just where you are. And it's a challenge, I think, that we have going forward. How do people pay for college when their incomes aren't going up and their prices are running away from them? They pay for it with student loans. The public has pretty strong views about student loans. We asked the public, what percentage of students do you think borrow to pay for their education? Public's answer, 72%. The real answer is 54% at four-year colleges, private, and 42% at four-year public colleges. This is the knowledge gap that the public has about paying for college. So the assumptions they make are much worse than the reality. This is a problem if you're trying to sell them your product. Even more surprising, we asked them how much they think people borrowed to pay for college. They think the average debt is $80,000 for a BA. In fact, at a four-year private college, it's less than half that, $32,000, $27,000 at a four-year public. Oberlin, a very low number right here. You have a very good number on people borrowing for college. How much do people borrow? Well, this is what it looks like. 2008, 2016, private for-profit schools went from roughly $25,000 to about $39,000. This purple line here is private, not-for-profit colleges. They went from about 17 or 18,000 up to about 27,000. So it was a significant increase over this time period. It's probably an increase, a rate of increase that can continue for a while longer, but it can't continue indefinitely if incomes don't go up. So the belief that students have been borrowing more money to pay for college is actually correct. Here's the Oberlin number. Good news is, in the first part of the last decade, you were down here in the range of 17,000. You were just about exactly where the four-year private number was, and you just about ended up exactly where the four-year private number is here. But you got some variations. You were pretty flat here, but the average debt of those who borrowed has been going up pretty quickly at Oberlin in the last couple of years. Fewer students are borrowing. That's the good news, but those who are borrowing steadily higher amounts, from about $22,000 to about $27,000. Not surprising, cost of education goes up, students have to borrow more money. This is interesting. The percentage of students who borrow is actually going down. This is something that the press hasn't picked up on yet. We're trying to figure out what to make of it. Percentage of students who borrow at private for-profit colleges has fallen from about 73% to about 62%. You see everybody else is declining as well. Oberlin, you too have a declining percentage of students who are borrowing. They're borrowing more money, but you've gone from 38% down to about 34, 33% of your students borrowing. After sitting through about a dozen of the focus groups and hearing the public say what they want out of colleges and universities, what's important to them, what worries them, I decided to try to craft a universal mission statement. Now, there is no such thing as a universal mission statement for American higher education, because all institutions are different, all institutions are trying to accomplish different things, they all have different missions, cultures, traditions, et cetera, et cetera. All I was trying to do was to see if I could craft a single sentence in which the public would tell us, yeah, that's what we want out of a college education. So here's my universal mission statement. Blank college will help students complete their degree in a timely fashion with a minimum amount of debt to enable them to succeed economically and enhance their lives. So 4 parts to it: complete, timely, minimum debt, succeed economically, and enhance their lives. Didn't say anything about jobs, but these were the 4 elements of it. No college or university would ever say this because it's so incredibly pedestrian. Well, of course we want this. Well, who in their right mind would think we wouldn't want exactly that? The fact of the matter is, this is what the public wants to hear from us. 71% of the public said they'd be more likely to attend an institution that was clear about complete, timely, minimum debt, succeed. You know, those aren't hard things for a place like Oberlin to document. The trouble is we're not doing it. We actually, just to test this out, you'll appreciate this, we went and looked at the websites of the 35 institutions that are on the ACE board to see how many of them prominently on their webpage talked about completion, time to degree, debt, and success. We saw a lot of pictures of nice buildings. We saw lots of comments about highly qualified faculty and small student-faculty ratios. We saw lots of stuff about extracurricular activities. But complete, timely, minimum of debt, succeed, no, that doesn't show up prominently on institutions' websites. And I think it's because what the public is asking for is so basic that we don't think we need to say it. I'm here to tell you we do. Especially as our prices go up, we need to say it. Anyway, we asked them if this would make them more likely to attend an institution. Almost 75% said it would, but 63% said that we don't do that. They don't think we do it. Only less than 20% think that's a believable mission statement. And it is so pedestrian that we'd never dream of saying it for ourselves. So that's what I've spent much of the last few months doing at ACE, in between trying to help navigate the political shoals in Washington, D.C. I know that Oberlin is thinking about these things. You've embarked on a process to dig deeply into this and to think about where you are going as an institution. A lot of institutions are doing that, and it's really critically important that you do it and that you ask yourself hard questions. Let me underscore that Oberlin is in an incredibly strong position to do this. You have a national reputation for a high-quality education. You have a good endowment. You don't have a great endowment. You have a good endowment. You've got some flexibility. You draw students from across the U.S. So unlike almost every other private liberal arts college in Ohio that gets 80+% of its students from the Rust Belt, you're drawing from the nation as a whole. These are incredible assets for you as you think about this. But the challenge is that the demand for the liberal arts is slipping, and the public is worried about paying a lot of money for a college. As I said, the public's views will change, but until it does, I think institutions have 2 simple choices. One, you try to change the public's mind, or 2, you consider what the public wants and tells us as you think about how you're going to move forward. And it's much easier to think about what the public wants than it is to come up with the resources to try and change the public's mind. It's very difficult to do that, and it's very expensive because you were talking about a national advertising campaign of some sort. Higher education's a big industry, but we are loosely connected, and that is just not the sort of thing that higher education as an industry is going to do. So individual institutions are going to have to struggle this through on their own. So I think the challenge for you is to offer a high-quality education that recognizes what the public wants and delivers on that, while at the same time remaining true to your mission, your values, your culture, and your traditions. Colleges change. We can't be afraid of change because we've changed many times in the past. Oberlin is almost 200 years old. Anything that is that old has demonstrated repeatedly its ability to change and adapt to different circumstances. The public believes colleges and universities never change. That's baloney. We change all the time. It might be slow. It is incremental. It is not easy, but we change. I dare say the Oberlin that I visit today is nowhere near the Oberlin that I came to visit in the 1970s when I was playing in intercollegiate athletics. And the Oberlin in the early 1970s was absolutely nothing like the Oberlin of 1950. And of course, everything changed after the Second World War. So if you go back to 1930, it was still a different place. But we're measuring change there. We're looking at decades. So change doesn't come easy. It doesn't come fast, but it does come. So good luck. Onward. It's a big challenge. But boy, you're starting from a terrifically strong place to address these issues. Thanks for having me here today.
Thanks, Terry, for helping us think a little bit about what's happening across the country. So I thought I would ask a few questions, and I know there are probably some questions from folks on the web and from folks in the audience. But I guess the first question I had was, one of the concerns that people have raised on college campuses is this sort of corporatization of higher education. And even the notion of responding to that type of mission statement that is transactional and that doesn't talk about the breadth and depth of the liberal arts and the work that we do here. And some people have said, we just need to talk about what we do in a better way. Instead of trying to respond to this transactional need, let's be more explicit about what we do. It almost this intuitive thing. If they knew better what we did, they would understand it. What's your reaction to that framework, that statement that this is just changing who we are in ways that it's not us? That's not the way to go. We need to find a way to talk about what we do more effectively to this public.
Well, that's a multifaceted question, a terrific question. Let me just say about the corporatization of higher education. I've worked in higher education for over 40 years. I've been hearing about the corporatization of higher education for over 40 years. It's something that's very much with it. The fact of the matter is, you are a business. And the first time you miss a payroll, there are going to be a lot of people who want a lot more corporatization at Oberlin. You have to observe best business practices. It's just simply what you have to do in the world in which we live. There is no option for it. It doesn't mean you have to become a highly bureaucratic, centralized institution. That's the part of it that I don't think necessarily follows. Sure, liberal arts institutions in particular are pretty inefficient places. They're very decentralized. And it's very hard for me to imagine, frankly, a highly centralized liberal arts college. I suppose it's technically possible, but it's just not the nature of the beast. So that, I think, is not, I just don't, I think institutions will become more organizationally sophisticated in everything they do, from HR to finance to business practices. That's certainly something you and I have both seen throughout our career, and it's very much to the advantage of the institution because it helps you identify ways to do things better and more effectively. When I was in college, very few colleges and universities contracted out their bookstore. Today, just about everybody does. When I was in college, there were a large number of institutions that contracted out, that did their own dining halls. Today, a lot of institutions contract out their dining halls. The concern about corporatization and losing an intrinsic something in a private liberal arts college is something every private liberal arts college that's wrestling with these issues confronts. This is not an issue that is confined to Oberlin. Everybody has to deal with it. In terms of if the public just knew a little bit more,
Right.
they would like us better.
And I think the way that comes up is, for the admissions folks in the room and the communications folks in the room, if admissions would just do a better job, if communications would just do a better job, then all our challenges would be solved.
Right. If only life were so simple. Again, any industry is guilty. It runs the risk of falling into this thinking that if we just give the public a little bit more information, they'll be happy. Years ago, I remember someone that when we were doing some other focus groups and survey research, looked at me and shook her head and said, "You guys are just like the drug industry." Really?
Really?
Talk about corporatization. And she said, yeah, they believe that if they just talked a little bit more about the benefits of the drugs that they produce, that the public wouldn't mind the high prices of the drugs that they're paying for. The fact is, the public just doesn't like high prices of drugs. So it's easy to think if we just find the right words, we can persuade the public, they'll think better of it, all our problems will go away. No, the public thinks what the public thinks. And you need to address that. The challenge for your admissions office when half the country doesn't like liberal arts degree is that a lot of people who would probably do incredibly well here, who would probably love Oberlin, simply don't put themselves into the mix to come here because they're not interested in a liberal arts degree. So the challenge is to sort of make sure that you connect the liberal arts education with what they want. Which is a good life for their kids down the road. Our sort of view on that is trust us. Give us $70,000 a year, trust us, your kids are going to have a good life. The public's a little more cynical than that right now, and we need to be aware of that and to try and address that cynicism. As you and I have discussed, Oberlin has a tremendous story to tell.
That's true.
As part of preparing for this visit, the president's office was kind enough to share with me a survey that they had done, that the college had done in 2017, a class of 2006. And the first question I wanted to know the answer to is, what percentage of students from the class of 2006 said they were satisfied with their education? What percentage of students from the class of 2006 would recommend someone like them coming to Oberlin? Now, put a number in your head. First one is, was it worth the time and money? Would you come here again? Second one is, would you recommend Oberlin to someone else? 95% said it was worth the time and money. 88% said they'd recommend it to something else. There are industries that would kill for customer satisfaction numbers that are that high. We have them, but
Right.
we don't use them. That's the sort of thing that might make a difference if you put it in the hands of the admissions office and the enrollment management people to talk about an Oberlin education and why it's worth considering. But it will be most appealing to the people who are ready to consider a liberal arts education. You want to get more people to think about a liberal arts education, and I think to do that, you need to connect it a little bit to post-college outcomes and documenting what you're doing.
Right. And you see a lot of colleges thinking about that. And we've been talking about that here at Oberlin, about undergraduate research, about internships, about study abroad, about experiential learning, trying to help connect prospective students to their life after Oberlin. We do those things well, but I think what we've discovered is that we just haven't been talking about them in a way that families and prospective students can recognize it.
Well, and the other part that comes through is you may not be making as much use of the alumni network for these sort of things as perhaps you can.
I think that's probably
fellow
fair.
who has the office next to me at ACE is an Oberlin graduate and sent 2 of his kids here. He's obviously a lifelong OB, and there have been a couple of times when someone from Oberlin has called to talk to him about his career. He left Oberlin, worked for a couple years, went to Northeastern University Law School, became a prosecutor, now works at ACE. And he's all too happy to talk to them and give folks advice and counsel. If your graduates are satisfied and 90% of them are willing to encourage somebody to go to Oberlin. Make more use of them.
Right.
Bring them into the mix.
And I think we've talked about that in terms of, we have a new initiative that's Wiser, that's a sort of an online platform where we could have more mentorship, launching career communities that connect students with graduates, trying to make that connection a little clearer. So I think that we're on the right track, but we certainly can do more of it. So one of the things I thought was interesting was sort of dramatic difference in a year between the data points. And so I want to ask you what you think is driving that sort of significant shift. And then the second question is really about the shift that I think we've all felt after 2008, right? So two moments where perceptions and people's views of higher education seem to be shifting dramatically. And so 2008 we can understand, right? Great Recession and people sort of thinking about cost and price in different ways. But if you can talk about what you think has happened and what lessons we should take as institutions, just this year shift, dramatic shift, and then what we should think about 2008 and people's shift in their thinking.
Well, I think many of us in higher education have probably failed to recognize how traumatic the 2008 Great Recession was and how slow many families were to pull out of it. Indeed, that was one of the explanations frequently offered for the election results in 2016. And certainly the data, median household incomes, suggest that there are a lot of people who are treading water, and the stuff they're trying to buy, like higher education that they think is important for the kids, is going up. We think, based on our focus groups, it's hard to get at this in polling, but based on the focus groups, what we think has caught the public's attention is the narrative about students not being able, graduates having a lot of debt, not being able to find a job, and living in mom and dad's basement.
That's captured the public's attention, and they have focused on that as one of the challenges in our work.
Right, it's sort of the dominant narrative in the media, and the more that the media talks about it, the more it just sort of embeds itself in the public's subconsciousness. Interestingly, when we did our focus groups, we didn't find a lot of difference between Republicans and Democrats on this. We didn't find a lot of partisan differences about higher education, and we did focus groups that were entirely composed of Trump voters. Yeah, there were some folks who said that colleges and universities were on the left of the political spectrum, and they're probably not wrong about that. But in general, it didn't trouble them. Also, what didn't trouble them is the free speech issue. You know, you hear so much about this from politicians. It just didn't show up in our focus groups.
So the public wasn't raising that as a significant...
No, to the contrary. In one of our focus groups, the moderator was just flogging the participants, trying to get them to say this bugged them. And the moderator had a very long list of questions for that focus group, trying to get them to say, yeah, this is a problem. They're squashing conservative voices. They hate Republicans. And the focus group participants sort of shrugged. And you do 2 focus groups a night, each one is 2 hours. So after the first focus group, I took the moderator aside and said, hey, drop those questions because you're just not getting anything with them. The public just doesn't see that as a problem. The conservative chattering class sees it as a problem, but it's not clear it's a big problem to the public. Yes, there will be incidents where things will turn out very badly at a college or university, and colleges and universities don't always handle it right because this is really hard stuff.
Right.
But by and large, it's not a big problem for the public. Also, I think higher education as a source of censorship and free speech problems has been overtaken by Twitter, Google, and Facebook. I think the conservatives have turned their attention much more to social media because there are numbers that people have pointed to suggest that the news stories that come up are conservative. You have Twitter deciding certain people won't be allowed to use their platform anymore. So we've got company in the view that we're stomping on free speech.
Right. So you talked about things that you're concerned about. Are there things that you would say you're really optimistic about? You talked about some of the assets that you think we have. So if you had to give us some takeaways around, I'm really optimistic about this piece. And the reason why I think that's important for Oberlin, but for presidents in general, and hopefully for all of higher education, is, we operate on the belief that we are preparing students to change the world for good. And we're optimistic about what our potential is as an institution. So are there things from this data that you say, yes, I'm optimistic about the way forward for places like Oberlin and for all of higher education?
I'm optimistic about places like Oberlin. I'm enormously optimistic about places like Oberlin because this is an institution that has been around for so long and has so repeatedly demonstrated its ability to adjust to changing circumstances. You'll do it again. I think everybody at Oberlin deserves great credit for digging into these issues, which are challenging, tough, hard issues for which there are no easy answers. I'm optimistic because despite the fact that we live in an era when public trust and confidence in institutions is tanking, we continue to be at the top edge of those rankings. We're doing okay. And I think that we have a lot of institutions that are asking hard questions and planning for the future very aggressively. As we discussed last night, it would be very easy for some schools, especially schools like Oberlin, to just sort of pull the shades down and say, I'll worry about that tomorrow, and put it off for 10 years. But the problem will be there in 10 years. Public might want different things from higher education at the time, but the problem will be there, will still be there in 10 years. We are fundamentally inefficient organizations with high labor costs and high fixed costs. Globalization has by and large killed those actors. So we need to
ask. On the optimistic side, hopefully.
But we're asking some hard questions about how to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And you can find plenty of places that make products that are high quality, expensive, and that are flourishing. BMW, anyone? Right. Mercedes, Tiffany's. Americans are fleeing to quality. That always sells. So you're starting from an incredibly strong position, and particularly Oberlin. You're better positioned than any private liberal arts college in Ohio, bar none. And you're asking the hard questions now, and it's the right thing to do. You're going to be far better off for taking it on now as opposed to kicking the can down the road, which would be the response of Congress to this sort of a set of issues.
Well, one of the things I've said about this, because it is hard and these are challenging issues, and it's, as you and I discussed the other night, some of the challenges that we have, all of these values that we think are important, and in the past we've been able to sort of fund and support all those values as much as we wanted. Mm-hmm. And now we have to balance those values and sometimes treat them unequally. And that feels like not the place we want to be in. Mm-hmm. And yet I think you're right, that if you don't deal with this, then you are making your choices much more limited in the future.
That's exactly right, and particularly institutions like Oberlin that have a pretty good endowment and have some flexibility. You can push these decisions off for quite a while. In fact, it might be healthier for your professional career if you did push these off to your successor.
Are you making suggestions out there? This is career advice now?
It's not in Oberlin's interest to do that because the options for your successor or her successor will be even more limited.
Right.
So I think you're doing the right thing. You're asking the right questions. We have some hard problems, but strong institutions are able to deal with them. And anybody that's been around for 200 years is a strong institution.
Right. Well, I've often said about this that Oberlin's worth it, right? And the decision not to do something about it is leaving the challenge to the next group where they will have much more narrow choices and much less opportunity to be flexible. And so it's worth our commitment to the institution. We're truly committed to it and we truly believe in this institution. We have to make the choice to try to do right by it. So I want to make sure we have probably time for a couple of questions. I don't know if there are folks on the web or folks in the audience here that want to ask Terry some questions, but we're happy to take a few before we close it out.
Hi, thank you so much. That was so interesting, and if somewhat dispiriting, it was also simultaneously encouraging. So I just wanted to know, this is a pretty simple question, how did you define liberal arts for the public?
We didn't.
Okay.
Because the public has a general idea what it is, but they're not capable of having any sort of a nuanced discussion about it. Perhaps if we had done a focus group with humanities PhDs, we might have been able to have a discussion about it. But the average registered voter, even those with a college degree, can't have this discussion. Unbidden, in almost every focus group we did, somebody went off on some aspect of higher education as being utterly worthless. And it was always in the liberal arts and humanities. Sociology came up in one focus group. French literature came up in 2 focus groups. I hope there are no French literature professors here. This is just what the public thinks, and our challenge is to try to address these misperceptions. We need to figure out ways to talk about the stuff better, but we can't think that we're going to change the public's mind on things like this because there's too many of the public, it's too deeply embedded, it's too expensive and too inefficient to do that. And I think because the record of your graduates based on the alumni satisfaction survey is so good, I think rather than try to change the public's mind about what the liberal arts are, you just ought to tell the public, we got it covered. We're doing what you want. They're persuadable. Remember, they have very high levels of confidence in institutions. They have high levels of trust in college and university presidents. Frankly, I think the public has a higher level of trust in college and university presidents than their faculty do. We just need to connect with them about what they're concerned about. We're not going to change underlying beliefs, but we can address their concerns.
When you say that, Terry, are you suggesting that we can identify the things that they think are important and demonstrate to them how we do that well, how we do that work well? Because as I look at our work, some of the things that prospective parents come up and ask me, or things that they don't see are there, I would say, absolutely, we do that well, and here's how we do that well. But for whatever reason, they're not seeing it in the work that we do.
They're not seeing it in the way we talk about what we do. And I think we need to just talk much more openly and candidly about, hell yes, we don't want you to borrow a lot of money to get an Oberlin education. In fact, you're going to borrow less than average if you come to Oberlin. And we're real determined to see you make a successful life. We're taking some steps to enhance our career services. We're looking to improve our internships. We're trying to connect students with alums who are active in areas where they are so that they can get advice about jobs. Well, I met with some faculty this morning, and we talked about using winter term as a way of dropping OBs into professional settings to let them see firsthand what goes on that might connect to what they're interested in personally and professionally. I don't think it's hard.
Right.
I think it's just something that for a constellation of reasons we haven't done very well, and now we need to start doing it.
But I can hear some faculty saying, well, when you talk about career prep, that's vocational. That's not who we are. This is a holistic experience. To even be talking about careers somehow diminishes the breadth and depth of our work. I mean, I can hear not just faculty, all sorts of folks connected with higher education to say, you have just made us a vocational school when you start to even go down that path.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is a challenge you're going to have to overcome. The issue here is to increase the number of people who want to come to Oberlin. And to do that, you need to convince them that you're offering what they want. You can try to get more people to come here by selling them your product as you want to present it, but if they're not buying, you're going to have a hard time selling, and that's just where the public is now. Who knows, in 10 years it might be different. Maybe we'll enter a new golden age. Hard to imagine, I realize that, but it's possible. And then the arguments change again. But you have a conservatory, right? Isn't that pretty much involved in career prep? I mean, that strikes me as something that's very important for most conservatories.
Well, I think the conservatory would say that they shape the profession. But I do think that the conservatory, that conservatory students come in with obviously a more clear design pathway for how they see themselves after their time at Oberlin, and they're thinking about entering a particular profession in a particular field. So that is certainly a way that they think about themselves. And I've said publicly that I think there's some things that arts and sciences can learn from the conservatory about that, how you do both things, right?
Yeah, it's not all that different from someone who goes into an engineering program, an architecture program, where the goal at the end is pretty clear. The process of getting there is laid out and pretty defined. It does seem to me that for the people who come to the college and seek a liberal arts education, the issue is come here, discover your passion, we'll help you pursue it, and we'll help you pursue it after you leave Oberlin.
Right.
That's the part of it that we have to connect. What comes next?
Right.
It's not just, we're done with you after 4 years, good luck. We're interested in you being a success going forward.
Any other questions? Oh, question from the audience.
Thank you again. I will out myself as a sociologist, so I'll put myself in that category. But one thing that struck me that I think makes sense for Oberlin, I was wondering if you would agree, is that things like Forbes reporting in ranking schools on the successfulness of the first salary, that's not our real product. It's not the product that walks across the stage at graduation. Our product is 20, 30 years out in terms of the career. And for liberal arts students, I think there's just many more vertical paths, at least there have been, and I think there still are, in terms of careers. And so that there's more potential growth for, if we're gonna reduce it just down to base wages and benefits over time. So we really do need to tell that story, I think, of, yes, this is the process, we're giving you these skills now, but the real measurable moment is 10, 20, 30 years down in terms of your career and what the outcome and potentials are, and to tell that story better. So would you think that Oberlin could use our alumni network to better make those connections between what's going on currently with our students and then how they progress in their careers?
Yeah, well, the ranking services do have an outside impact on higher education. It definitely affects the way the public thinks about colleges and universities. And in fact, colleges and universities think about rankings a lot more than perhaps they're willing to admit. The good news is that there are about a zillion different rankings out there now. I think zillion is a technical sociological term. And so they compete with each other, and I don't think there's any single one, with possible exception to U.S. News and World Report, because they were first, that dominates the other. The answer is put other data out there that puts your institution in the best possible light. If what you're aiming for is 10 and 20 years down the road, tell them, and give them some evidence to suggest, as your alumni satisfaction survey demonstrated, that 95% of your graduates were satisfied with their education. Speaking now as a parent, tell me what your graduation rate is. Tell me what percentage of your graduates would come again if they had to do it again, and I'll tell you if I'd like my kid to go there. I don't need to know much else than that. We don't do a terribly good job at that. Obviously, you've got a tremendous graduation rate, and you also have very high satisfaction of alumni. You need to simply put that out there more to communicate to the public. As much as I would love to change the public's mind about the value of the liberal arts, I know an impossible task when I see it. So what we have to do is tackle it on a campus-by-campus basis in very much the way you're thinking about doing now. I went to a liberal arts education, I majored in history. When I graduated, I guarantee you, the thought that I would become a lobbyist when I grew up was the furthest thing from my mind. Hell, I probably didn't know what a lobbyist was at that point. But that's what liberal arts educations have led people to do. We just need to find a way to document that on an institution by institution basis and embed it into everything you do to talk about what a spectacular place this is.
We have time for one more question. Oh.
So we have a question. How can Terry explain the dramatic drop in perception about the value of a liberal arts education? Does he tie it to the 2016 election and the attitude of the current administration?
No, I think what it is a fallout from the Great Recession. I think that the public intuitively believes, rightly or wrongly, that the folks most likely to succeed and maintain their jobs during the economic downturn were people who had a very definitive occupational field that they could rely on. So if you were in engineering, if you were in IT, if you were in any sort of biological sciences, the public just believes you probably did better than people who majored in philosophy or, if you'll excuse the expression, sociology. I'm not sure there's any evidence that that's the case, but that's what the public thinks. To the extent that the public thinks higher education is about job training, and they think that if you major in a certain thing, you are really equipped to get a job, that's probably what's at work here. One of the things I've speculated about is if we continue with an unemployment rate under 4% for the next 4 or 5 years, and incomes start to go up, jobs become more plentiful, will the public's attitude about the liberal arts change? It might, I don't know. But I think we are still living with the after effects of the Great Recession in terms of the liberal arts, because people think that a degree in sociology does not prepare you for a job right after college. And it may not, but it may very well set you up to be incredibly successful 20 years down the road. We don't have a good answer for that.
Well, Terry, I will take from this conversation with you the optimism about the prospects for Oberlin in particular, since that's where I sit right now, and the efforts that we're making to respond to this changing landscape, but also the opportunity that I think Oberlin has to be a leader in this discussion. I think one of the things that's so great about Oberlin is we do have a national voice and a national reputation, and all the things that we can do to help shape and move higher education in ways that respond to the changing landscape, but also respond to public perceptions. I think not only serve Oberlin, but will serve higher education. And I thank you for taking the time to come and speak with us today and help us understand the public's perceptions better. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.